extremely beneficial, enlightening. I want to save some time. It's my intent to save some time at the end to answer any questions you might have, even about things I didn't cover. For instance, I'm not going to be necessarily talking about the Fulcrum trial, but happily to answer any questions about that, my opinion, et cetera, et cetera. So that just kind of lays down a little groundwork. I want our time together today to focus on really the overarching scope of clinical trial readiness, because that is not just the missing component in a lot of disease-oriented studies and trials that pharmaceuticals launch that ultimately fail. Up to 80% of trials that are launched fail for one reason or the other. A lot of them is because of some component of what we would call clinical trial readiness. And so I really want to spend our time laying that out and actually coming to a conclusion, if you will, of what is our next steps. What is the next obstacle to eliminate? What is the next infrastructure that we need to build? And the nice thing is while it's not the end of our work, it is the final major piece of what I would call a fully clinical trial ready workforce and working ecosystem, if you will. So with that being said, let me go ahead and plunge in. I want to give just brief context. I've given this often in various formats and all of that, but the whole concept of where we can play in big, large measure in the global ecosystem and really accelerate therapeutic development from 15 to 20 years down to 5 or less is in the context that I'm going to lay down. And really there's two things and there's two ingredients. One is called collective intent. And that comes from a fusion of thought that comes from a shared sense of urgency. And that's where we've brought people around the table. And perhaps you've seen a slide where we've had little colorful stick figures around the table. And in essence, saying that we bring industry and academia and the FDA and patients and funding groups. And we bring all of these groups around the table to begin to work together toward a common goal and to fill the gaps in clinical trial readiness. That's our common goal. And that's what we've worked on these last 3+ years at really moving this thing forward. And the other component, and the one that is often overlooked, interestingly, by all of those other groups, is the patient advocate. The voice and activity of a strong, active, engaged, informed patient community will do more to ensure a patient-centric approach in therapy development and will do more to expedite therapies than almost anything else other than the pure science of it all. Consequently, we've built our whole organization, our whole operation, and our whole initiative on these 4 categories. So again, I'm not going to belabor the point. The first two are kind of our programs. There are twin tracks to accelerate research and therapeutic development and ultimately get promising therapies to our families. The last two really support the first two. They're the fuel, they're the infrastructure, they're the thing that we need to really empower the vehicle that represents the first two. Now, ingredients for clinical trial readiness for treatments in FSHD. I'm going to lay them all out. First off, way back when, and just like any other organization with any other disease, disease-specific organization, we begin with basic research, and that comes through grant funding. By the way, we're still doing that. Last year, we funded more grants by almost 100%, by about 75% higher than any other year we've ever funded grants, and that's because of a lot of people that have given a lot of their time, effort, energy, and dollars. And some of you are online right now. So I really appreciate that. We were able to move further, faster that way. But this is where we discover the mechanisms that cause the disease to happen. This is where we discover the targets that would be called druggable, or their therapeutic targets. And this is where we really find out the cause. And I've often said, when you have a cause, a lot of times then you can begin to work on the cure, because you now know what causes this. And of course, back in 2010 or 11, through funding of basic research and all of those kinds of things that have formed a base for us, we discovered the cause of FSHD. And so then once you discover that, once you find some druggable targets, either symptom relief or actually targeting the cause of the disease, pharmaceuticals, biotechs, academic researchers and academic institutions that ultimately morph into, they take this therapy and they morph it into a small biotech that has a business development process as well as a clinical development process behind it. And they begin to develop drugs. That's any kind of therapeutic that is targeted at mitigating, slowing, or stopping disease progression, in our case. And so you got to have drugs. And nicely, we've got about 20 plus companies, pharmaceuticals, biotech, small groups that are working on promising therapies. Most of them are targeting the cause of the disease, not just the symptom, which is really, really wonderful. While you're developing drugs, you have to develop instruments to test those drugs in a clinical setting. Some of this is, well, yeah, Mark, but again, I'm trying to be simple. It is more difficult to be simple. It's quite easy, much easier to be complex. But it's these testing instruments. For instance, Fulcrum, when they first, their phase 2 trial, they tried to measure DUX4. And I've said it before, these are my words, not theirs. They were trying to measure something that was very elusive with crude or blunt instruments, but it was the best we had. It was the best we had at the time. But these kinds of tests and instruments would be like a blood biomarker that many of you have heard me talk about, or an imaging marker, or some kind of a clinical test that has been proven in clinic over and over on hundreds of patients. That's why the Resolve study, that's why the MOVE study is so important, because it's there that these instruments not just are developed, but they're validated. And a validated instrument that the FDA will embrace that proves a drug's effectiveness is the holy grail for us. It really is. We have a lot of shots on goal with drugs and promising therapies. But this is where we really began to focus about 3+ years ago. Our efforts, our dollars, our engagement, our trying to get people around the table, our collective intent, so to speak. We also, beginning in 2016, began to focus on clinical sites. It's one thing to have instruments that can test the efficacy of drugs. It's another thing to have clinical sites that are built into a network. Coming from my former responsibility about 4.5 years ago, the one big obstacle in clinical trial development for them was not being able to recruit enough qualified patients. And so we set out to build a clinical trial network, not a research network. This is even more robust, but a clinical trial network that was a standing network, and it literally cut between 6 months and 9 months off of clinical trials ramping up and recruiting successfully enough patients. So that's the critical value of a good clinical trial infrastructure, as well as good clinical care centers that actually know how to engage with our families with FSHD, how to advise them, how to guide them in living their best life while they're on therapeutic, while we're waiting for a therapy to hit the market. So that's the second really key component. Once you have drugs and once basic research has identified some targets, it's the testing of those drugs. We've got to have a way to measure them, and we have to have a place to measure them. And we have to have somebody to measure them on. And so, of course, we have to have patient volunteers. It's interesting that in my career, in this kind of genre, in this vertical, this job vertical, that I have seen no less than a half a dozen clinical trials where the patients have experienced positive results on the active ingredient drug, and yet the pharmaceutical or biotech could not recruit enough patients to try their drug on, and they stop the trial and they put that drug on the shelf and the patients can't get it. That's a travesty. To have a therapy that works and not be able to get it through the process of trying it on enough patients so they can submit to the FDA so that they can get the drug to the families and get that approved. I don't even want to think about that, but that's what keeps me up at night. So this is really the pipeline. This is the pipeline that has to happen really in any kind of malady or disease manifestation, but this is ours. This is what we're facing now. In the where the FSHD Society has stepped in, obviously we've got a long history, 30-year history of grant funding, way far over to the left, and I think it would not be an overstatement to say all the significant developments and advancements in basic research that has brought us to this point right now has either been catalyzed by or directly funded by the FSHD Society. Again, arguably, perhaps with some, but I don't think it would be an overstatement to make that statement. So we have a proud heritage and history. We've got a solid foundation and platform to build off of. And so that's why 3+ years ago, we launched the Therapeutic Accelerator, and we have really heavily focused on trying to find and validate instruments or tests to show a drug's effectiveness in a clinical trial. And we have heavily invested in the clinical trial research network, in expanding it, in growing it, in trying to populate it with more of our families and some of those kinds of things. And now the patient volunteers. We built a good fishing pond, so to speak, a large database. We've grown our patient community over these past 3 years pretty dramatically compared to the last 15 or 20 years. But now we need to step that up, and we'll get to that in a moment. But all of these talk about a clinical trial readiness, instruments, tests, clinical sites that are connected, that are engaged, that are networked, so that you can expedite the trials and expedite recruitment and do trials in a standardized form so the outcomes can be validated, as well as patient volunteers for those trials. 3 years ago plus, 2019, in April, we hosted an industry collaborative meeting because we didn't want to miss the target with wrong assumptions. There is a second follow-up meeting, by the way, being planned for the day before our International Research Congress in June in Orlando. And we've invited, as a matter of fact, at that first conference, we had the FDA, we had the NIH, we're going to be inviting them back, EMA, we were invited. We had a few researchers that gave presentations, and then we had 8 pharmaceutical teams. This year, we're inviting over 20 pharmaceutical teams in just 3 years that are working on therapies or therapy development, or that are beginning to launch a program in FSHD. So we're excited about that. The purpose of it is to promote FSHD as a treatable indication. In other words, here are your targets, here's your drug targets, here's where you need to go. Introduce FSHD to the regulatory agencies, and we've done even more of that with our voice of the patient, which I'm going to mention in a minute. Identify gaps in clinical trial readiness. We also wanted to identify what were those issues that we needed to solve collectively as the whole community focused on this around the table. And we all identified the biomarkers. There's blood or circulating biomarkers. There's imaging or MRI-based biomarkers. Clinical trial network and infrastructure was deemed absolutely essential. Probably the main thing to date that allowed us to move from 6 to 8 pharmaceuticals to over 20 pharmaceuticals and biotechs that are working on promising therapies is the clinical trial research network and infrastructure. They also did this part up here with this little, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but this little measuring tape. While they formed this trial site network, they also, through the Resolve study and now through the MOVE study, they helped to validate certain functional measurements on our families. And I'll say this right now, the 300 people who volunteered and completed the Resolve study through our CTRN, you guys are heroes. I'm pinning a medal on each of you, and I've said this to some of you before, because without that, we wouldn't have this many shots on goal, so to speak, with these many therapies that are somewhere in product development in pharmaceuticals, because our CTRN as the network and the measuring tools they have validated and are working to validate that you participated in. Again, the patients signed up and volunteered has gotten us to this place now. But we recognize that in the importance. And we also recognize the importance of patient volunteers, actually incorporating the patient's voice. And if you remember the Voice of the Patient Forum that we did smack during COVID, because we couldn't wait. We could not wait. And the Voice of the Patient report that still is on FDA's desks and some of those things are valuable and will continue to live on. Improving genetic characterization and testing. And you'll see in just a moment that Test FSHD is the culmination of this particular meeting and the fact that that was pointed out as being very important. And of course, the integration of the patient data into a global registry. We're doing some things with that with the Critical Path Institute that I'm not going to be highlighting for the rest of the webinar, but happy to answer any questions about what we're doing through the Critical Paths Institute with other global registries. But we'll be talking about how we can actually turbocharge together patient data as we move on. Circulating biomarkers, I'm not going to spend much time with all of this. We launched several studies that we did ourselves through the COVID time frame. And now we're doing what's called a mass spectrometry study. It's a mass spec-based study that tests all kinds of proteins. Again, to remind you, those of you who might not know, what we're looking for, while we can't measure DUX4 in the blood, there are small studies, and that's what this says. We're doing all this built on existing data. If you can see my, under approach, built on existing data. We've formulated an experiment, if you will, with a company in Europe, and Fulcrum has stepped up to help us with some of their blood samples. We've gotten other blood samples from the CTRN through the Resolve study. Thank you again for those, because they're working to help us discover perhaps DUX4 releases a protein into the blood or a fragment that's not in people's blood that don't have FSHD. If we can discover that, that literally I think it's the holy grail, because now you can go in, not do a muscle biopsy, not do anything. You can take blood, you can see that there. If you get on the active ingredient in a clinical trial, again, this is a tool. This is a technique that, if we can validate it, can be used in a clinical trial to test the effectiveness, the efficacy of a therapy, and to test it very, very easily. That's why we've kind of picked this. We're kind of running with this, again, based on existing data, existing studies, small pilot studies that have been going on. We built a little collaborative of researchers and scientists. Lucia Ronco, many of you might not know her, but she was actually formerly leading the preclinical studies at Fulcrum Therapeutics. And so now we've engaged her as a consultant in this process. And so we're excited about that and hope to hear about that, about the results of that in the coming few months. It'll be quick, I hope. Certainly not quick enough for me, but I'll live with that. The imaging initiative. It's interesting that Fulcrum conducted whole body MRI in their phase 2 clinical trial. And so we've got all of those imagings, and that's where they showed really a statistically significant difference between the active ingredient group and the fat filtration of that group systemically, whole body, and those that were on the active ingredient and the placebo and the active ingredient group. There's a statistically significant difference in fat filtration from the active ingredient group and the placebo group. So very exciting. Again, this approach is built on reports from many studies, some of those through that grant process, which was to the far left of your slide when we looked at it. The grant process helped fund some of those that now can begin to validate the MRI as a study. It's interesting that our chief science officer, Jamshid Arjaman, was talking to AMARA and talking to our clinical trial research network site, or coordinating center, and talking to Avidity, among other pharmaceutical companies. And then Avidity stepped up and built out this trial, which then has been expanded to 200 people through the MOVE Plus. By the way, the MOVE study was started because we expanded the CTRN. But I'm getting ahead of myself. We believe that if we can show and validate that, let's just say a therapy stops fat filtration for a year, and yet the placebo group experiences fat filtration sometime during that year, that could be used as a surrogate biomarker to prove drug effectiveness. So that's the key there, and that's why we do this. Of course, the Clinical Trial Research Network, we put in about $1.2 million in support. We actually launched it in 2016 with support from two of our major donors, two of our families that have really then, those dollars have been multiplied many times over. But we stepped up 3 years ago and we said, we need to put in about another $1 million to expand the network, which we did. Now they have 18 sites. When I arrived here, we had 7. So now we have 18 sites in Europe. And interestingly enough, just recently, and it made all kinds of press and all kinds of news, which was exciting, FSHD Canada committed $2.8 million for the next 3 years to both expand the network, and I'm hearing now 22 sites with up to 4 in Canada, which is good, and maybe even more, and to enlarge the MOVE Plus study, an imaging study. So those things are happening. I know that Avidity wanted to do about 100 in the MOVE Plus study, where they get whole body MRIs on day 1 and day 365, and they're compared to the AMARA process using artificial intelligence. But the extra dollars have really gone into, along with somebody stepping up, has gone into expanding that to 200. So that's I think the optimal size to do this kind of study, not the minimal size that we can do to see the results. So very, very exciting there. Genetic testing, we just launched this, and this is pretty amazing. We found out from some of our clinicians, neuromuscular specialists, that it is really hard to fill out the forms and to get them processed and to get therapy or get genetic testing ordered for any of our families. This process, while we're working through a few snags and hiccups in the process, this is really a direct to patient access. You can go on our website, you can click on a button, it takes you to a Genome Medical website, you click another button, you fill out a form, and a genetic counselor contacts you and the process begins. It's truly amazing. We're paying for the first through, let me just go ahead and expand all of this, through the pharmaceutical partners that you see on the right. We're really testing this program. So the first 150 through it, we're going to pay for it. There is a component with Genome Medical that they'll help you apply for insurance and all of that when the support ends, and some of those kinds of things. So this system is built and operational, and we've outreached to industry for financial support, and you can see those, and I want to honor those companies that's helping us do this. And there's all kinds of new methods. I just show you this, not to walk you through it at all, but to say that this is really, this is built on components. So like if LabCorp, if we find a different phlebotomy process, we can plug that one in, or an additional one, we can plug that in. If we run across different testing methods that are either cheaper, faster, better, whatever, we can plug those in. Genome Medical does the counseling and the referral, which is really awesome. They also help, like I said, with insurance filings and some of those kinds of things. So this is really a pretty revolutionary, this will revolutionize direct to patient access for approved, verified, CLIA certified genetic testing for our families. So we're really excited about this, and we're moving some folks through the process and kind of helping to test this. But this is up and available for anybody. And again, this is just the last slide here. Go to our website, beta testing. Sign-ups opened on April 18th, and here's some of the time frames you can expect. This is what actually the site looks like, and you click this button and you fill out a one-page form, and the rest is the rest they kind of carry you through the process. So I'm real excited about this, as you can maybe tell, because this puts in the hands of our families the ability to ask for a test and to get it, and to get results, and to get appropriate counseling around those results, and an appropriate referral to a neuromuscular specialist. So we're really proud about that. Again, critical obstacles for FSHD. This is just another picture of what I've just gone through. The ideal trial scenario is a well-characterized and homogeneous patient population. Our FSHD families are neither. And predictable progression and outcomes. And we aren't that either. And so we recognize that to build this bridge from the promising therapies that we have all the way to FDA approval and ultimately to get to our families, we need registries and a natural progression of FSHD. We need to find some of those elements that progress and how they progress through large data set studies. Clinical measurements of FSHD progression. And this is really where the Clinical Trial Research Network, that CTRN, is really focused in on and really helped put this piece of the bridge into action and into motion. Blood biomarker. This would be revolutionary. It's an elusive thing. I will admit that, and I will say that, but this would be revolutionary, the holy grail, really, if we could find that. Imaging markers, as I've mentioned, and the patient voice and involvement. And this is a piece that we've been gathering and we've been working on, but we're going to be moving forward more aggressively into the future. And that's the next level and the next piece. And why? Here's some of the pharmaceuticals. This is just off of our website. Some of the pharmaceuticals and researchers that have therapies. We already know that Fulcrum is set to launch sometime very soon. I mean, in the next month or so, within the second quarter of this year, they're going to begin to recruit 230 patients, 20 FSHD 2 patients, but to recruit 230 patients for their phase 3 clinical trial. The quicker we can help them identify and recruit and get started on the therapy or in the trial, the quicker the trial can end, the quicker they can do the stats and present it to the FDA and get hopefully a drug that stops, mitigates the progression of the disease to our families. But we've got another very, very small trial. You might not hear about it except maybe from a press release because it's very small, but it's in muscle growth. And it's from one of our pharmaceutical partners that have yet to go public, but they will. And what we've been told is sometime around July, they're going to launch this kind of a phase 1, a phase 0. It's a proof of concept study, but they're going to launch it within a year, either end of 2022 to 2023 Q2, I would say. Arrowhead, Avidity, and Dyne are going to be set to launch. We're working with them. So hopefully those timelines won't be pushed any further out, but we know that they're going to be ready to launch. Interestingly, it's going to require just for these an estimated 500 or more qualified. That's a key word. We can push 5,000 people into the top of the funnel, but they're looking for a pretty narrow set so that they can be as homogeneous as possible. Remember, that's the one characteristic, so that wherever their disease manifestation is on the spectrum, they will move together in the trial. That way you can eliminate the variables as much as possible and get a homogeneous unit with as eliminated variables as possible into a study so you can test the effectiveness of your drug. So we know that they're going to need that. We also know that according to current statistics, it could take as many as 5,000 people in the funnel to get 500 qualified. And we're going to try to reduce that. We're going to try to refine that and define a better target so that we don't waste your time, we don't waste our clinic's time, and we don't waste the pharmaceutical time, but we really get qualified candidates in the top of that funnel so they can move forward faster there. But we know that we're going to need more families. This is just a real quick picture of the whole, phase 1 through 3 of a typical clinical trial. You start with preclinical. That phase 1, that proof of concept that I mentioned that one pharmaceutical was launching in July. That's over in the tens. But then you have the hundreds and you have the thousands. And number of participants and cost can either make a trial successful or doom it. And so we want to make sure that we lower that threshold as much as possible. Both by our estimations and by a management company's purview of the global ecosystem, what's going to happen, the trials that are in the pipeline, we both came up with a number that we're going to need 8,000 identified patients on a list in a database with some characterization of their life and living with FSHD will be needed in the next 3 years. So where are we starting from? We have 23,000 now in our database. I only mentioned that. We started about 4 years ago or 5 years ago with about 9 or 10,000. We've actually grown our database. Some of these we know are patients, but have yet to self-identify. So that's our bullseye right now. That's our target. That's where we're going to fish. We've got 4,500 plus, almost 4,600 now, known patients. In other words, they've checked the box. They're in our register. They're in our database, and we can reach out to them. We need to double that, as I mentioned, 8,000, and we need to ensure that at least half of them are actively engaged in education and studies and trials and raising the hand saying, sign me up. Why? It shortens recruitment timelines. Actually, Fulcrum said that the one benefit of their phase 2 trial was they recruited in half the time, and then COVID hit. But because they recruited so early, they were able to get the majority of their group through the first part of that trial. And so that gave them some reason to keep it going for longer. And so recruitment timelines are incredibly important. Time equals lives to us. It reduces costs, increases trial efficacy, plus it increases the understanding of the disease through shared information and insights. And this is where everybody, you go, well, what they tell me is I've aged out. I'm too old. I don't qualify for any trial. You still can have a voice, and you still have an incredibly important part to play in some of these other engagement activities. Health economic outcome report, industry focus group, pre-trial questionnaires, published materials on the FSHD journey, where your voice is literally amplified through our megaphone. Many of you have seen this, the formula for expediting therapy development. It exists in every disease manifestation you can name. Accelerated research, and engaged community, and activated patients equal clinical trial readiness. And this is where our activated patients live. In the engaged community is chapter activities and affinity groups. And what that means is we've got an early onset. We've got a Gen Z group. We've got share partners groups, and we've got these different affinity groups that are part of engaging the community and activating the community to move things forward, and all these other things. Of course, accelerated research, natural history, biomarkers, imaging, we talked about all of that. But here's where an activated database or an activated registry of patients really pays off, and something that we're going to be needing in our future. So let me very quickly go through this. This is you're seeing this first, and it might not be where we stand, but our pact with you, Patients Accelerating Clinical Trials. We need to launch the patient registry and an integrated health platform to accelerate clinical development. This is the next phase of our development. This is the next, and I think the final gap, like that bridge, that big hand coming down with that final gap in the bridge infrastructure that we need to do in order to create a clinical trial ready ecosystem that many, many trials can run through, and all of the effective therapies can get through that trial, through the FDA process, and to our families faster. Why? It supports our mission, accelerates treatments and a cure for people affected. This is, as I said, the last major piece of the puzzle. We're still working on all the others. We've not forsaken all the others, but we need to add this as a major initiative going forward to acquire 8,000 patients, to activate at least half of them, and to have it on an integrated health platform that can empower all things about the patient journey in FSHD and literally amplify your voice. The time is now. Therapeutic development is growing, 20 plus therapies. The need for more patients to participate in clinical research is becoming acute. And that's really important. Eventually, in the very near future, if we don't act, and if we don't act now, we will suffer the same fate as my former charge, where they will have clinical trials, they'll be trying to recruit for them, some people will be on them, and the therapy might work, but they'll shut down the trial because they can't recruit enough people. I can't let that happen. We can't let that happen. So we'll fill an unmet need. There's a natural history registry in Rochester. It's great, it's deep, it's prolific, but this is really for clinical insights into the patient journey, as well as clinical trial matching and recruiting. Here's why we need to develop this integrated health platform. Our current database is a Salesforce database. Right now, we have contact information, and our current capabilities is to make you aware of what's going on. That's about it. Here's what industry needs in order to have successful clinical trial readiness of a patient community. We've just been made aware of this, quality of life issues, et cetera. In our Salesforce database, we thought at the start of the year we could do this. We found out we can. So advocacy groups, why do they have registries? I'm going to go through this in the interest of time very, very quickly, to facilitate patient participation in research and to give them a voice in the process. Support clinical trial matching, compile genetic information, characterize the disease, symptom expression, etc. Follow patients undertaking a specific intervention. That's post-marketing studies and some of those kinds of things. Identify subgroups. That's early onset. That's FSHD2 families. I know that our chairman, when I was hired, our chairman, and he's chairman emeritus now, he kept saying, I want to find out why my wife was rollerblading at 65 and my daughters were in scooters at 20. Because of this heterogeneous, and that's how we identify these subgroups. And that's how we identify them to begin to analyze and talk about some of these other issues, lifestyle factors, amassing data to advocate for expanding insurance coverage for therapies and services. This last bullet is going to be absolutely important, and your voice is going to matter here. It will matter. So the purpose of ours is to overcome obstacles, to connect patients and their communities with researchers and clinicians, and to help researchers and regulators understand patient perspective. And I would also say the payer system, the insurance companies, and to improve patient care. Our platform will enable an enriched understanding of the experience of living with FSHD, including disease burden, patient journey, unmet medical needs. See, it's not just about registering for clinical trials. It's speaking into the world, literally, through an amplified voice on the patient journey, because that matters. It will matter in clinical development. In summary, our integrated health platform, our patient registry that we're going to be launching, accelerates therapeutic development, gives and amplifies the patient voice, clinicians' vital insights, provides regulators with critical patient perspectives, the FDA, the EMA, and other regulators, removes barriers for pharmaceuticals. Our integrated health platform literally addresses the entire continuum from grants, basic research, all the way through FDA approval, regulatory approval. The value here, it's valuable to patients and caregivers, it's valuable to clinicians, it's valuable to academic researchers, and it's valuable to industry. By the way, we don't sell any patient information. We are the caretakers of it. We will monitor, we'll manage it, we'll care for it, we'll steward it, we'll amplify the voice of it, and we'll utilize it to accelerate research and therapy development in FSHD. So why us? I think we're ideally suited to capitalize on growing interest in patient data by building a high-impact patient registry integrated health platform. Registries and platforms like this give FSHD patients and caregivers a direct means to participate in the research process. Many of you have said, other than giving you money, what can I do? Do I have an answer for you? This is what you can do. Creating, maintaining, and sustaining a patient registry requires a variety of skills. We're uniquely equipped for that. We are not grant funded. When a researcher gets a grant, they do a project. If that grant runs out and they can't get another grant, the project sits there. Or the patient registry sits there. And so we're here, we're in it for the long haul. Unique position of trust held by the society. Our deep knowledge makes us uniquely and ideally suited to do this. In support of our aims with the therapeutic accelerator, our registry will de-risk research investment and facilitate research, and the time is now. Actually, since I landed here in September of 2017, I felt like I've been running behind. And so the time was yesterday, but we're moving and we're moving forward at really a record pace, and we need to do this. And again, if not us, then who? And if not now, then when? And this is just summary. I'm coming in for a landing here and can take questions. Again, drugs, therapies, along with ways to measure their effectiveness, along with a place to do the test, sites and clinical infrastructure, along with an active, engaged, and volunteering patient community will equal therapies to our families by 2025. The last major piece of the puzzle is building this integrated health platform and acquiring or engaging or enlarging this platform to 8,000 strong, all speaking with one voice, 8,000 plus strong. It will make a difference. Because of your involvement and support, we have moved forward in accelerating clinical trial readiness or clinical readiness development involving the necessary tools, blood biomarkers, imaging, et cetera, and clinical infrastructure, while enhancing the biopharmaceutical pipeline. We have done that together. Through your support in the past, we have been able to move this thing forward really at lightning speed in the clinical development world. Clinical Trial Research Network has been the catalytic infrastructure for advancing tool validation and site coordination. Somebody might argue with me on that. That's fine. This is my opinion, and I think my opinion's right. It has been the catalytic infrastructure for advancing tool validation and site coordination. The challenge that lies before us now, which will be as impactful as the Clinical Trial Research Network. The day we launched that, and we helped launch that through funding back in 2016, that's brought us to this place, the catalytic infrastructure. The challenge before us, which will be as catalytic in moving things forward faster as that was, is to create an integrated health platform, a patient registry that will be filled up by you and informed by you and empowered by you to move things forward faster. Enrolling and activating an additional 4,000 patients, 8,000 total, thereby amplifying the voice of our families while ensuring accelerated involvement of thousands of patients in clinical studies and trials. Here's a place that you can just be aware And if some of you feel like you can help through extra giving, the need here is that while we have a business model around this integrated health platform, that biopharmaceuticals and grants and other things are going to step in and continue to sustain and grow it, to launch it, we will need to raise and invest about $500,000 in startup funds. The board's approved $300,000. I think that we can get others to actually kick in. I mean, the $300,000 comes out of our donor money. So $500,000 all total is what we need for startup funding. So that's where we are. That's where we set. But it's the last major piece of the puzzle. It is catalytic in moving this thing forward faster. And I know working together, we will accomplish the goal, and we'll accomplish it together. The only thing I want to do is throw this up. We have over 6 days in June in Orlando, Florida. We're going to bring the world together. The leaders in research, patient care, advocacy, education, and support, along with our families, in these conferences or quote unquote sub-conferences. The main ones are right there in the middle, the International Research Congress on that Thursday and Friday, and the Patient Connect Conference on that Saturday and Sunday. And I want to invite you to really be a part of that. I thank you for your time, and I'll stop sharing now, and have left about 3 seconds for no, I'll be here as long as you want, but I'm happy to take any questions.
Great. Well, there are questions coming in. A number of them were on how much is this going to cost? And you already answered that question for starters. We have some more, research related questions. So here's someone who wants to know for clinical trial readiness, do we have FSHD patients lined up and diagnosed adequately for the clinical trials in the pipeline? Do we have sufficient natural history study data for patients with FSHD1, FSHD2, and infantile onset or early onset FSHD?
Wow, that's a great question. And it drives to the heart of the matter of this platform, this integrated health platform. We're going to be augmenting the data that we have, but I will say that our natural history study through Rochester has data that goes pretty deep on about 900 of our families of our patients. About half of those are genetically confirmed. No, I think about 60% now of those are genetically confirmed. I think 50 or so, and I could be wrong with that. I heard this from June, so I ought to ask my colleague, would be classified as pediatric or early onset, where it's a little more aggressive there. I do know that there's some FSHD2 patients that are in that. So we do have that asset to use right now. But the idea is that we have to, that's 900. What if we took our 4,500, enlarged it to 8,000, and didn't get this deep of data? I'm off my screen now, but got at least this deep of data. Some of those things that characterize early onset or diversity, equity, and inclusion criteria, or groups like FSHD2, I think is going to be. How about groups like, I think they're called Gen Z, but let's just call them the younger group, that are maybe less affected, and they're not in a lot of registries because they're less affected. But if we can use some acquisition and activation strategies to bring those in, we will learn volumes going forward, and we'll be positioned for almost any clinical trial that comes our way in the near future. And so, great question. There are those assets out there in what I would call limited scale. And now we want to scale them up through this platform.
Great. We have, and since you spoke about the Rochester Natural History Study, there's a question: is it being discontinued due to lack of funding? And if so, is the FSHD Society going to include their data?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think candidly, I can share this with you because nobody told me not to. I've been talking with Dr. Tawil at Rochester about just that. And, do we incorporate it in this platform? We can. We have that ability. We would have to reconsent, and you'd have to do a lot of different things to make sure it stayed HIPAA compliant, which this platform will be HIPAA compliant, by the way. And so we're prepared to do that. At the same time, we don't want to reinvent the wheel. We don't want to burn resources that don't need to be burnt. They are applying for follow-on grant funding. Right now, they don't know if they're going to get it or not, but I've let them know that it will not cease. That if somehow or another the grant funding doesn't happen, we're more than ready. Our community is more than ready to step in and to steward that asset well and to take care of that and hopefully actually automate it, improve it, and expand it. And so we're working hand in glove with them, and we're into talks with them, which is great. It's really great. We're partnering with them pretty well.
Here's a question from someone who says they had a test several years ago. I think it's the saliva test from Peter Jones's lab. Is it appropriate to have a new genetic blood test now?
I know that June could answer these way better than I could, so I'm kind of smiling now. Actually, to qualify for clinical trials at this moment, they require an authorized or a certified genetic test, which right now is through PerkinElmer, University of Iowa. Those two institutions are the main ones that are doing really a certified test like that. Peters is a research test. And so I think it's from what I hear and understand, it's very accurate, but it hasn't been certified yet, so it can't be added. Now, if one day it does, we're happy to plug that in. Like I said, our genetic testing process is a plug and play. And so if somebody comes up with a better, cheaper, faster test that's way easier for our families to take, we'll plug that in there too. But right now, or if the pharmaceuticals change their qualification. So right now, to be clinical trial ready, you have to have a certified genetic test. And that's the only difference.
It's a question here. Are there other nonprofits that have already built an international integrated health platform? And if so, wouldn't that save us from reinventing the wheel?
What a great question. Yes, they have. We're not a pioneer in most things. I'm a great. I copy things, especially the successful things from other organizations of our ilk. And this is where really we have some of the assurances that as we move forward in this regard, there's a strong business plan behind it because there's already funding that's built into these kinds of initiatives that have been demonstrated by many. The platform that we've chosen is actually engaged and involved with about 80 patient advocacy groups like ours. And so we save in that platform has already been built. When they build it out for us, it's going to be built based on some of those models and modeling. So we're going to save some, in other words, we're going to gain access to some strategies there that we might not otherwise have known about. And so that's exciting for us. The difference between letting another group do this on our behalf is that they don't care about our families like we care about our families. And they don't know our families like we know our families. The larger muscular dystrophy space, for instance, they have 40 main muscle diseases to pay attention to. And they know about a lot of it, but they don't know you. And they don't know, and they don't wake up every morning saying, how can I make sure that therapies get to our FSHD families faster? We do. And that's really why we do it. And that's why other, for instance, muscular dystrophy organizations have stepped out. Parent Project Muscular Dystrophy, Cure SMA, some of these others, they've used this platform that we're going to use. That's why they've stepped out and created the registries on their own, just like we're doing too. And I won't talk about the uptick in the dollars, in the revenue dollars flowing through the doors when they did this, that then went back into the research and back into patient engagement and development and moving accelerated therapies forward. It's a well-worn path. Let's just say it that way.
Well, we're definitely leveraging the work that other groups have done. We're getting there faster and cheaper than if we're building from scratch. That's for sure.
See, June can say it so concisely.
And we are out of questions, so we can let everybody go have their tea or lunch. And I'll say goodbye. Well,
thank you all for your time again. I appreciate it.
Mark, thank you so much. And June, thank you. And for everyone who's still on, we have recorded this and we will get it sent out early next week. So thanks and have a great day.